Hello, 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 everyone. Hi. Welcome back. Welcome to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I'm your host, Tigre Gardenia, nature inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious Community. So it's Friday. We're here. If you're new here, welcome. Please make sure you do all the YouTube stuff, hit to subscribe. God, I can't even think. Like and subscribe and share and all those good things. I'm trying to make that smooth. I haven't figured out how to do it. Obviously, as you can tell, I'm still, even after all this time doing streaming every single week, it's still something that I have to work on. It's one of those things. So if you're new here and you don't know me, I am known as the World Ambassador for Plant Advocacy, a World Ambassador. I spent over a decade working closely with plants, sharing their practical wisdom to help you embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In these sessions, I explore plant neurobiology, cognition, intelligence, humanities, and the birth of the critical plant studies, all through the lens of personal evolution. So together, we're going to break down the science to understand the mind of plants and how their wisdom helps us reawaken our plantness, ultimately living an authentic life as a being of nature. And I love Fridays. I love doing these. I love having the opportunity to come here and talk to you live about all of these different aspects. So today, I actually, rather than just jumping into a paper, I actually have a few articles. The reason why is because I found these articles, as I was on my hunt. So I go through so many different papers. I have a list that keeps getting longer, so much so that right now I have open as one of my tabs. There is a new publication, a new journal called Plant Perspectives. It only came out pretty much, I think, at the end of last year. They have put out their um, second edition in the first volume recently. It's called Network of Plants and the Language of Resonance in Science and Literature. And there are so many papers, all of which I want to share with you. All of which, well, not all of which. There's one there that I'm like, not that one. But pretty much almost all of them. There's poetry, there's sound arts, there's reviews, there's so many different aspects of it. And that doesn't even count the ridiculously long list that I already have. So as you can tell, this field is growing, everything is augmenting, and therefore I am trying to find the best way to bring everything to you. And one of the things that I do think is useful is that intermingled with the papers, I think it's always interesting to put out to talk about some of the articles that came out during that time period, because it helps us understand the difference between where the science is, where is it that science or academic thinking in general, because some of them are, as we've reviewed papers connected to the arts, we've reviewed papers that are connected to theater, we've connected to many different, to philosophy and to sociology and all these anthropology, so the humanities in general. And so we've done a few different aspects when we do a paper that all relate to plant consciousness in some way, shape, or form. And this gives us the academic perspective. Where is it that we're moving in our understanding and our application in that? But we know that to a certain extent, the academic world is somewhat of a petri dish. It's like this little container. It has its own mind. It has its own way of operating in things. And so seeing general articles that come out around the same time gives us an understanding of how much of what the academic world is sharing with us have we figured out, or better yet, have we digested into the mainstream world. Also, depending on the publication, we can understand whether or not it's been digested by general people or whether or not it's actually still something in some kind of niche. And I think relating to plant consciousness, this is important because there has been a lot of sensationalized content as well, lots of articles that pick up on some paper that came out and take it to an extreme. And I think it's also interesting to see the different approaches that the mainstream media takes, different than, for example, how an academic would take it. Remember, we've talked about this relating to Paco Calvo, who is extremely conservative in the way that Palco actually looks at the world. Oh, sorry, that was not supposed to happen. Sorry. Paco Calvo is actually really conservative in the way that he expresses and he talks about the world. And yet we have this more kind of progressive and even cutting edge answer that's coming out in the overall mainstream world, which is, I find so fascinating. So anyway, so today I wanted to, before we dive into the paper that I have, which even that in and of itself has a few elements that I think are really, really excited. But at the same time, yeah, well, let's look. Let me just put the paper up because I think that that's going to be a lot easier if I just share with you, not the paper, the first article, and then we can dive into it. It's been a little bit of a crazy week. I finished off, as I talked about last week, my webinar, and then I've had kind of like the aftermath of the webinar. Next week is going to be a really crazy week for me because I actually have students that are coming. As you know, I am a teacher of Medit Action, which is the initiatic school at Domenher, and I have students that are all over the world, and I have a few of them that are here today. Right now, that is really exciting. Some of my Norwegian students, but I have my Dutch and American students and Bulgarian students that are coming next week. So that's exciting. I have a whole program set up for them. So it's going to be a little bit of a crazy week for me, but that's okay. I just hope the weather clears up. We're in the middle of one of those rainy periods that is happening in so many parts of the world. And it feels like Seattle rain. I lived in Seattle for a long time, and it just feels like Seattle rain. It's that kind of like, it's like, I always said it, God is spitting on you type of perspective. But yeah, that's what it is. So I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know how. It just is. But anyway, not here nor there. Let's get into our paper. So this is not that one. This is our first article. Our first article comes out in Salon, and this is Can Plants Think? The Burgeoning Field of Plant Neurobiology has a lot to say on the matter. Now, this is the part that I find fascinating, and I'd love to hear your thoughts of this because I want to know if you think it's something that is as interesting as I do. And you can leave it a comment, you can put a comment, or you can come into the Naturally Conscious community and continue this conversation when I post the replay of this. And here's the part that I find fascinating: the burgeoning field of plant neurobiology. Now, because you've been here with me since the very beginning. I started the papers in 2006. This article comes out in September of 2022. 2022, 18 years after plant neurobiology became a thing. And this is the burgeoning field of plant neurobiology. Now, is it burgeoning because articles or because the papers that are coming out are actually starting to show things a little bit more concretely? Is it burgeoning because they just discovered it and didn't realize that it was a thing for this long? Like, why are they calling this the burgeoning field? I am shocked a little. I don't get it. And I think it's funny. To me, it's hysterical, the idea that they would call this the burgeoning field of plant neurobiology. But that being said, it is the term that they're using. So hold on, let me set this up a little bit better for myself so that I can see it. I have a large screen, but it still feels like I haven't figured out the best way, not right, because there really is no right or wrong. The best way to set up my setup here and to do this. I have this desire to go look at people who do this, like stream on a regular basis, and I want to look at their setup. I want to understand how it is that they do it, and what am I doing differently, and how can I do it? Okay, anyway, so this is an article that comes out in September of 2022. It is in Salon magazine. I don't know who this writer is. Let's see if it says it at the very bottom. Do you tell me anything about the writer? Matthew Rosa is a staff writer at Salon. He has a master's degree in history from Rutgers in Newark in 2012. 2012. And was awarded a Sciences Journalism Fellowship from the Metcalf Institute in 2022. Interesting. History. All right. All right. Let's just, we'll go with that. So maybe that's why he thinks it's the burgeoning field. Plus, the field started before he ever graduated. So it says something. Okay. So, though they lack brains, scientists are figuring out new ways to probe whether plants think. Let's see which articles or which papers do they allude to. Americans like to mow their lawns, but blades of grass aren't supposed to all have the same length. Left unsheared, an all-natural lawn contains grasses of wildly varying heights, more akin to an unruly, uncombed head of hair right after a long night's sleep. This, you know what this reminds me of? Do you all remember? Okay, so I'm sure many of you do. Do you remember the old chia pets? The whole idea that you had this kind of, one of them was a head, and you smear these seeds. I think it's like alfalfa seeds or something like that. You smear them up on the top, and then they'd have these little sprouts that come out, and that creates the hair. And so you have this chia pet or a chia person. That's the image I'm getting right now. I'm getting the image of the chia with all the little hairs that finds it. Wait, hold on. I want to see if, come on. Chia pet. They still make them. Hold on a second. Let me find. Hold on. I'm trying to find a good picture of it. So before I shift, there's all kinds of them, but that's not the classic. I don't see the classic one that, we all grew up with. Hold on. I'm waiting to see if I can find it. Okay. Let me not keep you waiting. We'll do this one because it's Bob Ross and it just makes me laugh. How do I do this? I have to remove this. I have to. Okay. I told you I'm still getting good at this. I'm not very good at it. Okay. Chip, share that. Look at that. Bob Ross. Like, doesn't this what it makes you think of? Like the grass is growing and such. They even made an elf. I think it's funny. I think it's very funny. They did this. All the chia pets. I don't think any of them ever look that way. I think that when you actually get one, it probably looks very, very, very different. I never did one. Did you? If you ever did one, put it into the show notes. I'm so curious as to whether or not you have your own little chia pet. Because anyway, look, man, my mind is going there today. Okay, so let's see. Left unsheared, an all-natural lawn contains grasses of wildly varying heights, more akin to an unruly, uncombed head of hair right after a long night's sleep. A lawn is not a single organism. We've talked about grass quite a bit. But a large community of plants that have individual heights. Being mowed is not the natural state for a blade of grass. Nope. This raises the disturbing, actually, right, as I walk to the Damanhurcrea from where I live, I love the fact that there's like the curb has all this grass that's just left wild, and it just makes me happy, I have to say. It's one of those things where this grass growing there with no bounds just brings me delight every time I walk by. I love grass though, but if you know me, you know this. I absolutely adore grass as an organism, as a being. I learned so much. I have an entire episode in my podcast that's dedicated to grass and my work with grass. So this raises a disturbing question. When a human mows a lawn, is that the equivalent of mass torture to the grass? Assuming the grass can feel or think the way we can. Okay, that is a compound sentence because can grass feel and think? Yes. The way we can? We don't know. The proposition is not as outlandish as it might seem. Recent research suggests that plants are far from the stationary automatons that make us think of them as. And though they don't have brains in the same way most animals do, plants seem to possess a different set of evolutionary tools that suggest they may experience consciousness, albeit in a radically different way from us. There are numerous definitions, but the most simple and relevant is this. Consciousness. Oh, this is about consciousness. Hold on, let's keep going. One such theory of how this works this might work is known as the cellular basis of consciousness theory. Now, if you go to last week's episode, our plant consciousness, I talked specifically about the different theories of consciousness that could be applied to plant consciousness. And it was a really fascinating article from that perspective. If you go into that paper, you will see all of these different definitions of what is consciousness and how it is that plants could be or should be applied to that theory of consciousness. Really fascinating. Definitely recommend you do this. This posits that all life, from the smallest single-celled organism and on upwards to the largest animals on Earth, possess something akin to consciousness. In our cellular basis of consciousness theory, consciousness evolved with the very first cells, and all cellular life is endowed with consciousness, which is essential for their agency, survival, and evolution. Explained Dr. František Baluška. Hey, they didn't put the accents right there. I don't like that. When you have a name that's foreign, you should put the accents, because without the accent marks, the letters are different. Just so you know. I think that's rude. I think that's rude. A scientist at the University of Bonn, not a scientist, a very important scientist at the University of Bonn's Department of Plant Cellular Cell Biology, in an interview with Salon, Baluška has published articles in scholarly journals from bioessays to philosophical transactions B on the subject of plant consciousness. According to CBC theory, CBC theater, our cellular basis of consciousness theory. So it's one of the many theories of consciousness. Every cell that exists possesses the innate qualities necessary to possess a level of self-awareness. This is big for Baluška, because Baluška's theory is all about how the cellular makeup of plants naturally take us towards consciousness and towards agency and towards intelligence and all the many aspects. We've already covered so many of his papers, and we will continue to cover a lot of his papers, even though his papers are very technical. So where someone like Calvo, when we cover, is also practical and does do experimentation, but being a philosopher, his theories are much kind of broader, where Baluška's theories are very direct on what he believes to be neuron-like behavior in plants, which is concentrated in the root tip. So there's a lot of work relating to the root tip. How is it that the root tip is the plant's way of perceiving the world? How does perception work in that perspective, containing these neuron-like transmitters and all these different aspects that come from it? So Baluška's testing and experimentation is very technical in nature, fascinating and easy to read. He often teamed up with Stefano Mancuso to do a lot of experiments, and now he's been expanding. And so it's he's a heated figure, and he's very adamant about this field. I had the pleasure of being able to meet him last time, like I said, last month now, when I was in Padova for a conference, and it was wonderful to hear him kind of just be able to get a sense of who he is a little bit more. According to CBC Theater, every cell that exists possesses the innate qualities necessary to possess a level of self-awareness. It points out that the individual cells are able to interact with their surroundings in a manner that clearly displays a sense of agency. Baluška and other scholars, like psychologist Dr. Arthur B. Reber and neurobiologist, we just found the first error. Neurobiologist Dr. Stefano Mancuso. Given that Mancuso was my professor, he is not a neurobiologist. So this is already all wrong. I don't know who Arthur B. Reber is, so I can't say anything, but Mancuso is a plant physiologist. So he does argue a lot of these things, but he is not a neurobiologist. So Mancuso has argued that these are structures in all cells that endow each organism with a certain amount of consciousness. And if he was a neurobiologist, he most likely would not be arguing this, because we know neurobiologists do not like to argue the idea of plant consciousness. There are numerous definitions, but the most simple and relevant is this: consciousness is a feature of living systems, allowing them awareness of their external and external conditions, Baluška wrote to Salon when asked to define consciousness. And this is one of the big arguments that happens from the plant world, which is that the goalpost keeps moving. We have these definitions of consciousness. There are already multiple theories of consciousness. Why is it that when we start to apply these theories of consciousness, The biological world says, no, 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 wait, wait, wait. Let's redefine this because they want to make it more human centric and not good. Not good at all. Not good at all. Um, so where am I? Dr. Paco Calvo, who we talk about all the time, and in our paper last week, has an upcoming book, a book that already has come out. We have read it as part of the Plant Wisdom Book Club. If you haven't read it, go check it out. It's really good. Co-author with Natalie Lawrence, called Plantisapiens: Unmasking Plant Intelligence. Calvo works at the MINT lab, the Minimal Intelligence Lab. Minimal intelligence not meaning that you have a minimum amount of intelligence. It's a definition of intelligence. I actually kind of hate this name personally because I think it degrades or downgrades what he's doing with plants. But hey, it's talking about basal cognition or basal cognition, which is like base level, the fact that we all have a certain amount of cognition. I just think that it implies that it stops there. And I don't like that part. At the University of Murcia in Spain, and provided Salon with his own definition of consciousness. There is no one single agreed upon definition of what consciousness is, Calvo to Salon by email, which is true, to the extent that a coherent definition can be deduced based on what scientists know for sure about biology. However, Calvo speculated that consciousness relates to the presence of feelings, subjective states, a primitive awareness of events, including awareness of internal states. This is a very different definition. And remember that we're talking here in this case about consciousness, which is different than intelligence, right? Intelligence relates to things like I remember past events and I can make decisions based on what I'm taking in by comparing that to my past event and then making decisions about future events. So in that case, intelligence is really more about my ability to process information and do things with it. Consciousness adds an element on top of that, which is the subjective state. I know that I am taking all of this information in. I know that I'm taking it in a way that is unique to me. I am probably also not just processing it through filters of what happened last time, in the sense of these were the mechanics of what happened, but I'm probably also processing it through some kind of emotional filter of how I felt when that happened, how my emotions changed or my feelings changed based on different aspects. So I am aware of the fact that I have different states within me and that I make different decisions based on that. Hopefully that's clear. And that's really the main difference of consciousness and the reason why there is even greater struggle in the idea of giving consciousness or giving the label of consciousness to plants, because different than an animal where we can see things like fear, which is often an internal state, right? I am reacting to a feeling. Why is it that I can see things, certain kinds of, pride, or I can see other kinds of elements in an animal because the animal behaves very similar to the way we behave in most cases, then it's easier for me to accept and recognize consciousness. But when we're talking instead about a plant or fungi or bacteria, it is hard for us to understand what does happy, what does sad, what do fear, what do all of these different aspects mean? We see it a little bit with the Mimosa pertica because being a plant that closes the leaves, we can sort of intuit that the plant must experience some kind of danger, which might lead you to believe that there's an emotional state of fear in there and a feeling. But we don't have any way of, from a scientific perspective, of quantifying that or judging it or understanding it. And therefore, it's like, oh, well, if we don't understand it, then it's not happening. And that's, I think, the biggest error that's happening. I mean, that's the error that's happening in our current scientific makeup, which is, it can't just be that because I can't see it or I don't know how to recognize it, it's not happening. I wonder what would change if we looked at the world from a different perspective. It is happening until I can prove otherwise. I think that might be a better model to attempt to work from. Within that context, Calvo Calvo points out that scientists have already demonstrated that a number of non-human animals possess sentience, from cephalopods like octopi to insects like ants. And as the list continues to grow, it is reasonable to at least wonder if plants, as well as neurologically wired organisms, can be found to have self-awareness. See, just that sentence makeup drives me a bigger bonkers, because it's to wonder if. So you don't have it because I can't recognize it in a way that I understand, rather than saying it's reasonable that plants have this, and therefore we're trying to understand what does self-awareness look like for them. I think. You tell me in the chat. You tell me in the chat if you think that that makes sense, but I think that that's a much better way of looking at it. But I'm going to let you decide. I'm going to let you tell me. Sentience, we may say, makes sense for life as an essential underpinning to the business of living, Calvo explained. And it is very unlikely that plants are not far more aware than we intuitively assume. Oh no, I intuitively assume they're very aware. Don't put me in your bucket, okay? Don't put me in the bucket. To the skeptics who insist that consciousness must be tied to a central nervous system, which we already covered in our paper of Beyond Nervous Systems, where we describe the fact that our problem is not necessarily believing that it's tied to a central nervous system. It's our definition of nervous systems that is another aspect of the problem, and that plants would not need to evolve consciousness in the first place. Even if consciousness, as understood in vertebrates, is generated by complex neuronal systems, there is no objective way of knowing that subjective experience has not evolved with an entirely different kind of hardware in other organisms. Ding, 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 ding. This is it. This is it. And see, what I like about reading articles is that articles simplify these concepts that we have read in many of these papers. But of course, in the papers, they're completely filled with all kinds of different words and thoughts and all this type of stuff. This kind of sums it up very easily. We have no evidence to conclude that no brain means no awareness. Ding, 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 ding. That's it. That's the other piece. It is certainly true that we cannot yet know if plants are consciousness. Well, you can't, but we use non-academic models and to know. So we know. But we also cannot assume that they are not. Exactly. Calvo added, plants, not unlike, say, locked-in patients. This is his new theory. Well, new theory as of the beginning of the 2000s. So, I mean, the 2020s. Around 2021, he started to talk about this, the idea of locked-in patients, to use a model, a reference model that we could better understand. So Paco Calvo went from describing all these different kind of a little bit more technical or philosophical or even biological processes to saying, look, let's assume a person who has locked-in syndrome, right? We, for many years, did not think that somebody with locked-in syndrome was actually present. But we have discovered that they are present, that a human being who is experiencing locked-in syndrome, where they cannot communicate, they can't move, they can't, talk, they can't really express anything. We are discovering that even if they're sitting there in a state that seems to be not aware or not conscious, to use the words of what we're talking about, we do know that they are conscious. So therefore, our definitions were wrong. And so if we think of a plant in the same perspective, what if a plant is locked in the sense that they are there expressing in the way that they can express, that kin express, we can't read it. So therefore, kin is locked into communication within themselves. Might well have significant conscious experience, although there is no way for us to intuit it, nor for them to communicate it to us. Not everyone is convinced by the various theories that exist for plant consciousness. Dr. David G. Robinson of the University of Heidelberg's Center for Organismal Studies co-authored a 2021 article from the scholarly journal Biochemical and Biophysical Research Communications. Hold on, I want to click this link because I don't know this paper. Well, I mean, I don't know if I know this paper. I'm trying to see. Integrated information theory does not make plants' consciousness more convincing. I got to look through this. Oh, it's another Tice article. I think we went through this. Or at least somewhat went through this. This is an article from what year? I mean, a paper from 2021. I'm going to go check. I don't remember if we went through this one. Which addressed another theory that pro-plant consciousness proponents claims backs up their belief. On that occasion, Robinson discussed we did talk about this, integrated information theory, and we also talked about this as part of our consciousness paper from last week. Because Calvo and I think it was Segundo Ortiz, I can't remember who he was writing with in the paper from last week, did discuss integrated information theory. So we have more of an updated, because that paper is from 2022. So we take this and integrate it into that other paper to get a more updated, an updated definition. Robinson discussed integrated information theory, which attempts to identify the fundamental properties of consciousness and then ascertain the physical bodies that correspond with them. That already just sounds like a losing proposition. And then, more broadly, Robinson was dismissive of those scholars who say that plants can be conscious beings. I can only refer you to the article of Mallet et al. Oh, this is another one of those human neurobiology papers. I'm not even going to get into it, where the debunking of myths was painstakingly carried out. But of course, if your answer is, with no brain, there's no consciousness, then of course it's easy for you to debunk, because you just don't recognize any possibilities. Since plants don't have a brain, see what I'm saying? I didn't even read the next line, but I anticipated it because I knew exactly what was coming. Mancuso, in his 2015 book, talks about distributed intelligence to explain the fact that many animal-like properties, hearing, seeing, chemical signaling, etc., are shown by epidermal cells. He equates this with consciousness, because Mancuso is definitely on the other end of the spectrum, where he has, his belief in plant consciousness is strong. It is strong with that one. Again, studying under him, I understand. Where am I? He equates this with consciousness, but in all these cases, these are genetically programmed responses. No, they're not. No, they're not. This is what the human neurobiologists want us to believe. That's what they want us to believe. They are genetically programmed responses, which are not centrally coordinated, and there is no indication of feedback. This is not consciousness. Bullshit. Robinson added, there is a huge popular following for books, e.g. from Dr. Monica Galliano, who he also doesn't like very much, which we also read her book. We've read that in the Plant Consciousness Coming, Plant Wisdom Book Club as well. If you are really interested in these types of books, if you really enjoy the concept of getting into books that talk about nature and ecology from the perspective of wisdom and evolution and having really fascinating discussions, come join us in the Plant Wisdom Book Club. It's on my website. I'll also put it into the show notes here so you can easily find it. But just, Google in Plant Wisdom Book Club. Humanizing plants. No, Galliano's book does not humanize plants. Now, you could say that Peter Wohllebin's books, which we've also read, humanize plants. And the anthropomorphism with the plants is a little too much. But Galliano does not humanize plants. She talks with plants. She has connection with plants. She has something that is probably not necessarily in her connection always 100% biologically explained, because again, it's a communication, but she is not humanizing plants. Don't get that confused. Telling us that plants can communicate with us. They can't. Okay. If you do not believe that plants can communicate with us, put it in the chat and tell me why, because I'm curious. I mean, come on. How is it that animistic cultures, right? Indigenous cultures have been communicating with plants since they started, like since the beginning of time for their time? Why is it that we struggle so much just because we can't devise an experiment. And why is it that these human scientists do not believe or do not even propose to themselves that maybe the problem is that they don't know how to devise the right experiment, which is what Galeano did. Galeano basically said, I don't know how to devise an experiment to show this. And then P. Plant said, hello, you're thinking about this like a human. Put yourself in our shoes or our roots or our soil. Put yourself in our soil. Does that work? Yeah. Put yourself in my shoes as a human. Put yourself in my soil as a plant. I like this. I'm going to go with it. Put yourself in my soil, and you will understand that we need a different kind of experiment. This is shamanism, pure humbug. Oh, calling shamanism pure humbug. It's fool's gold. Can't believe that Robinson has the courage to publicly call shamanism something that has existed before he and his sciences ever existed. And let's call it, or they, I don't know if Robinson, wait, did we say a name? Even if it was, I don't know. They existed. And they're calling shamanism fool's gold. Ugh. We learn nothing about plants by reading this literature. Okay, you tell me if you have read Paco Calvo's book, Monica Galeano's book, Susan Simard's book, Stefano Mancuso's book. You tell me if you learned something. Did you learn something about plants? And also, did you learn something about your own humanity by reading these plants? I want to know. I want to know because this person is pissing me off. I am not a fan right now. While it is likely an exaggeration to dismiss the ideas about plant consciousness as pure humbug, you think? You think? It is fair to say that they remain unproved. Is it unproved or unproven? Unproven? I don't know. Indeed, if they were validated, in order to validate them, we need to think differently than the human neurobiologists want us to think, because the human neurobiologists only use one criteria: what's inside of this cavity. And plants don't have that, so therefore we need a different definition. They would have remarkable implications in terms of the ethics of how humans interact with plants. And there is the problem. Our problem is that this changes our ethical dilemma, and there is the struggle. It is the ethical dilemma, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that holds all of this back. All of this is held back by that statement right there. Because can you imagine everything that has to change when we have to ask? Sorry, I had to laugh because Michelle's like, this is why there are still flat earthers. Yes, Michelle, this is why there are still flat earthers. This is good. True. Very true. Oh, I love it. I love it. Oh, I mean, I don't love that they're saying this, but I love it. We should acknowledge that plants are complex living systems which deserve dignity, as it is stated in the Swiss Constitution through the amendment from 2008. Burgeoning field, and yet that was written in 2008. Balushka argued, as animals, humans, and plants are in close coevolution and have the same biological origins. We have like plants have anyway. We should treat them as living organisms deserving dignity. Agreed. Calvo noted that even if humans only acknowledge that plants have a very primitive form of consciousness, again, we love Calvo. We do love him, but he is super conservative and he's trying to go little steps by little steps. He doesn't like to rock the boat too much. They should still, plants were here first. Exactly. Plants were here first. And that's the thing we have to remember. Oh, hold on a second. I've got to close. Okay. Sorry, I have something that is binging and binging and binging, and I wasn't expecting it to bing. So now I've had to kill that. Okay. Um, they should still make us feel even if humans only acknowledge that plants have a very primitive form of consciousness, that should still make us feel uneasy at the realization that plants are agents, subjects with their own thought process and not mere objects or resources to be exploited more or less widely. Can you imagine wisely? Can you imagine everything we explore? I was at a flower. So here's another one of my little asides. I went to my hair is driving me bonkers. I went to a garden show the other day, and I have a love-hate relationship with garden shows. I obviously love being able to go and spend time and see all these beautiful plants. I hate how many of these plants are raised. And for example, I have a retreat here to Damanhur called Nurture Your Nature. And as part of Nurture Your Nature, I take people to a garden show or equivalent garden show, depending on when that we happen. If you wanna experience Damanhur and the magic of the plants, please let me know. I'll show you where you can find out all that information to Nurture Your Nature. Anyways, when when we do this, I take them to the garden show or the garden because I want them to learn how to ask questions. I want my students to understand and enter into a relationship with plants, especially from a purchasing plants that is very different. So I have you actually talk to the people who are raising these plants to understand their individual relationship with plants. Are these people aware? Are they having a discussion about the ethics? Are they concerned about the plant's well-being as a being, or are they just propagating and like forcing the plants to grow? It's a very different thing, and it changes. When I go back to visit my family, for example, last time I went with my mother to Home Depot and, she wanted to buy some plants and I was horrified. I was just sitting there trying to be a supportive daughter while at the same time at some point I was like, "Mom, can we go to a local nursery?" And even there, again, it really depends on the nursery. So it's about asking questions. Now, I can do that and I can hopefully encourage other people to do it. And so I did convince my mother to go to a nursery that I knew that had a different relationship with plants. But they're not always easy to find either because even people who love plants kind of love them by controlling them rather than loving the plants being plants, especially because if in a garden setting, it means that the plants might not be the most beautiful plants you've ever experienced in the world because those plants might have grown up with more freedom and therefore they're more adapted to their location, but they don't have all of the chemicals to make them flower at the times that the gardener wants them to flower and all these different aspects. So it's just a very different relationship. And it's one that we as humans are not necessarily ready to have. We won't even talk about clothing and food and furniture. I'm just talking even about plants being plants, but imagine all the others. So that's why Calvo's comment about, plants as agents and not mere objects or resources to be exploited more or less wisely is a very important inhibitor to the recognition of plants as intelligent, conscious beings. Most people would dismiss the very possibility that plants are sentient at the outset, negating the need for an ethical standpoint and arguing that it would lead to absurd implications, Calvo pointed out. And I must confess that for many years, the ethical implications of the proposition that sentience might extend well beyond the animal world hadn't troubled me. But the parallels that are emerging between the way that plants sense, understand, and respond to their environments and the way that animals do are making it increasingly difficult to avoid these questions. In fact, our success at tackling the ecological crisis may depend, I'm going to say this, right? Our success at tackling the ecological crisis may depend upon facing these issues head on. This is an important point. Oh, this is an important point. This is an important point. And that's where he ends with this article. So I'm so curious as to what you think. Michelle's telling me a story. She went to Arizona. Her dad went to Arizona one time. She's telling me about getting an actual cactus from a desert state. So going to a farmer's market in a place where that kind of cactus grows. This is what we want. But even so, how many of us ask the question to how many of us ask the question to the cactus about whether or not that cactus wants to come home with us? Ooh, I like this. So Michelle was telling me, she says, she was telling us, hold on, it's a longer one. So father went to this booth and in a local market, and the lady running the booth grilled him for 10 minutes about Michelle to see if Michelle would be a good plant parent. I love this. I love this. Or plant partner. I think that this is exactly what should happen. I would love for that to be the thing that happens every single time. Every single time. Okay, so that was our first article. And this was all about the burgeoning field of plant neurobiology. Now, oh, go away, you. This is an interesting, it's kind of a slightly different topic, but related because it's in the same time frame, and I find it interesting that this comes out around the same time frame. This is from, hold on, Fast Company. Excuse me. Fast Company. This tree owns itself and it's fighting for its own survival. I hate the fact that they're saying it. We will use key and kin. Key as a singular plant pronoun and kin as a plural plant pronoun. So just so you know. An artwork part of the 58th Carnegie International Art Exhibit, the legally autonomous tree will own the land it grows on, key grows on. So let's see what this is Nate Berg. This comes out about a month after the previous one. So 2022, again, still September, but near the end. Let's see who Nate is. Hold on. Does it say anything about, oh no, go away. Nate Berg is a staff writer at Fast Company where he writes about design, architecture, urban development, and industrial design. None of these are plant people, by the way. And I find that is very, very interesting as to why. Okay. Can I actually, hold on, I'm trying to see. I don't know if that's going to work. Ooh, okay, this is better. I'm trying to get all those ads on the right. They make it really hard for me to read. So I think this works better. Okay. On a few square feet of land on the campus of the Community College of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, a black gum tree has been planted that could change the world. I like how because we don't know that this exists in other places, we think it's going to, we humans. Actually, hold on. Sorry. Let me see something. Very cool. I mean, no, not that one. This doesn't really change it all that much. Pretty cool. Okay. Anyway, in a complicated arrangement, the tree is a legally autonomous entity that owns the land on which Key is planted. As Key establishes Key's roots, care for the tree will be provided by the Carnegie Museum of Art. Interesting that see what I'm talking about the arts and why the arts are so important. It is the arts that thinks outside the box. It is the arts that allows us to experience things in ways we never thought possible. The arts. If you think that being creative or being a part of the arts is not important, here is another example of why it is important. Because while neurobiologists and plant physiologists and philosophers are all arguing about the definition of plant consciousness, an art museum is able to push forward the idea that this plant is autonomous and this plant owns kiself. See where the arts can push through things that humans can't. The tree is an attempt to rewrite the rules of conservation on behalf of the entirety of the non-human natural world. The only thing about this is that just look at the photo for a second. I don't know if you see what I see or what I see as the problem space, but can you identify what the problem was? I'll give you a second. You have this tree that is being planted here, okay? And this tree is self owned. Let's say it that way, okay? I am my own tree person. But do you see right down here the little grass that's being torn up? All these other grasses, which are also plants that are owned by whom? To kin owe themselves own kin self. You see all these other trees that are far away. Do these trees own kin self? I get it that we have to have a pioneer. We have to move things forward. But do we not recognize and could we not acknowledge the fact that we are privileging, giving privilege to prioritizing, I don't know the right word, one tree. And in the process of even planting that tree, killing many other plants around. Maybe not killing, okay? But I hope you didn't kill anybody, but just a point. The tree and its unconventional legal framework are a project of Terrao, I don't know which way it is, an artist group based in Germany that is exploring the use of novel technologies and legal frameworks to protect ecosystems through established human laws on personhood. This is similar to the Eternal Forest project that Evgenia Emets is working on. She, I can't remember which episode of the podcast that was. It was in the 70s, I think. You can go check that out. It was really, really good. Commissioned and planted as part of the 58th Carnegie International Art Exhibition, opening September 24th, the tree will attempt to become a legal precedent, showing how non-human species can gain the autonomy and protection of personhood. Do the trees have a pretty privilege? I don't know. It's a good question. It's a very good question. Trees might have a pretty privilege. We're interested in how personhood is constructed in legal terms, but also in economic terms, says Paul Seidler, one of the three artists behind Terrao. I don't know. Corporations can gain the status of personhood. We asked, why is there nothing like this for ecosystems or natural systems? Look, man, we've been asking this for years. There are some natural systems that have gained personhood. Some mountains, some rivers, waterways mainly is the easiest to get so far. Forests, but man, it's hard going. It's hard going. How is it that a corporation could do it easily? I don't know. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Terrao began exploring this idea in 2015 and published a white paper on the concept shortly after. The artist had initially explored the idea of using the blockchain technology. Why? Why use a resource-heavy technology to do this? To underpin the sovereignty of a piece of land in Germany's Black Forest, but hit a wall when it came to the computational side of digitally tracking thousands of trees, shrubs, and forest plants. Doing this because the metaphor has to be different. You cannot think of the metaphor as like all these. We need to rethink the metaphor. Doing this on a medium scale is economically incredibly difficult to try to justify, said Terrao's Max Hampshire. New Hampshire. Max Hampshire. I'm not going to speak anymore. Max, just Max. So they decided to scale down from the chunk of forest to a single tree. Okay, so that's why. Starting in 2018, they began working with Sohrab Mohebi, curator of the 58th Carnegie International, to figure out how to realize the project or how to create. Anyway, the tree has its own legal counsel. The museum has its legal counsel. Our partner who's giving us the land has legal counsel. It's kind of amazing, says Mohebi. That's a lot of legal fees. Oh, there is our tree. After working with a number of lawyers, because the lawyers always have to get involved, Terrao has narrowed in on a legal entity that seems likely to be a precursor to the tree gaining legal personhood. The tax-exempt 501c4, a type of entity the IRS, obviously in the United States, refers to as a social welfare organization, but which is most commonly used for political lobbying. So, little person here, not only are you your own person, it sounds like you're now a lobbyist. Welcome to the political system of the United States. Good luck. May they introduce your alternative logic, because the current logic is creating a shitstorm. Like, shitstorm. Ah, it's a dark gray, not just a gray area, it's a dark gray legal area, says Terrao's Paul Colling. The tree's 501c4 will have the sole goal to lobby at the municipal level to grant this tree personhood. Tree is a lobbyist. I love it. Personhood as a legal status is notoriously challenging to achieve for non-human species. Why? We do not know. The recent case of Happy, an Asian elephant in the Bronx Zoo, for whom lawyers had spent years unsuccessfully trying to win personhood, is one example of an uphill battle for non-human rights. Because goes back to what we were talking about in the last article. Do you know how much of our lives would have to change if we did this? How much of our lives would have to change? Our whole thinking process. What do you do for a forest? Are there individuals? Who is the guarantor? Who is the entity or person that would think on their behalf for the human, who would advocate from the perspective of human language? It gets so complicated. Should we go down this path? Absolutely. We need these conversations. Need to have these conversations. If anything, just to get us out of our current thinking, which doesn't work. Even though Happy has demonstrated a deep emotional intelligence more commonly associated with people than animals, courts have been hesitant to grant to this elephant the inalienable right of a human. Another reason to change our court systems, by the way. Go vote. Just go vote. Go vote. We need all the help we can get. Cerro is hoping a tree may offer a simpler way for making the case that non-human species deserve their own set of rules and rights. You think a tree is going to be easier than a cuddly, emotional elephant? I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but the answer is no. Might be easier because people will think it's more benign, but then when it sets a legal precedent and they start thinking, wait a minute, what about all of those plants in Home Depot? Do all of those become individual persons? Yeah, no, this is going to be an uphill battle. Again, a battle worth fighting for. The tree in Pittsburgh aims to use its 501c4 status to help build that legal case and become not only legally autonomous, but also its own owner, not its, Key's own owner. At one point, the tree will be granted personhood, says Colling. What a brave person. That's manifestation right there, man. Set the intention and go for it. Then, if this happens, when this happens, we can use a traditional legal body like an LLC, where the tree, which now has personhood and therefore has all the rights and duties of a person, can be the sole shareholder of a company that holds kiself. In exchange for the care that the Carnegie Museum of Art will initially provide the tree will mint non-fungible tokens annually. Of course, this is where the blockchain comes in, the creativity of the blockchain to do non-fungible tokens that the museum can sell to offset its cost and keep the 501c4 operating. So therefore, because unfortunately in the world of humans, you, little person, do not have the ability to make money. So somebody's got to take care of you. Or do you really? I mean, really, does the tree really need care? Key's a tree. Key knows how to take care of. Anyway, you have to sort of like parse conversations and just focus on one. This technology has shaken up the way art has typically been exhibited and valued. Because we're not talking about art. We're using the container of art to talk about a person. For the most part, it was the market or institutions or organizations that followed the art. They figured out how to think about art, how to respond to it, how to monetize it, says Moebi. That's been happening since the Renaissance. See, art is important. All forms of art. But now, what's a little different is the technology of the token. And then we're rushing to see how culture can fit into it. Is it really all that different? It's just that I don't own the piece of art directly. I own the non-fungible token, which is a way of me owning a piece of the art. I mean, it's really not that different. That's resulted in a surge of NFT art that is charitably less than artful. That's true. Some of it's really bad. Tarot Tree Project seeks to shift how these emerging technologies can apply to the art world in a more progressive way. For us, it's really about trying to see what these new technologies can be used for, but also maybe highlighting what they can't be used for, Colleen said. We know this will cause some legal turbulence, probably, but it's important that this turbulence is interesting or useful. Maybe it's important that it's disrupting, because that's good. The tree was planted in July of 2022 for Terrao, and the hope is that the tree lives on long after this edition of the Carnegie International Art Exhibition, and that its legal autonomy becomes a guiding point for other non-human species or entire ecosystems. I wonder if how this tree's battle is going. If anybody figures it out, please let me know. Go find it and let me know. I want to know. Put it in the chat, put it into the comments. I want to know. Or entire ecosystems to gain their own form of personhood and legal protection. An exciting moment would be if people were to take this as a first step toward a new model. Moebi explains that this is exactly why he wanted this project to be part of the show. I like to think of it as a prototype, he says, because once this is figured out, we can really say how this can be applied at a larger scale. Why couldn't the Grand Canyon own kiself? Fair, totally fair. I wish there was like an update on this. There's not even a good way of doing it because they didn't put a name for the tree. Did you notice that? Like, oh, let's give the tree a living entity, but what happens if I go here? This is the same article, but there is no, let's see what happens. Okay. Check it out and let me know what you think. I'm curious as to whether or not we can, what's the latest update? Is this tree now owned, kiself? What's going on? I'm very curious. I'm very curious. Okay. So those were two in. See what I'm talking about the differences also, right? We have read up until 2022 all of the different papers. The papers are technical, they're arguing, they're all these things. Now we read these articles, and these articles are much easier to digest because they're entering into the mainstream world. And they're a little bit behind, but at least, because by this point we're already discussing in 2022 expanded forms of consciousness, more different theories of consciousness, expansive forms of nervous systems. We're discussing different aspects around plant intelligence and different components of consciousness. So lots and lots of other things that are happening at this time, which of course the articles can't cover because the articles are focused on an entirely different audience that they need to bring up to speed. But that being said, it's still really important, relative, and I think gives us a good indication of what's to come. Hold on, I'm trying to fix. Here we go. Okay, so I do have one more paper that I feel like is connected to all of this. I don't know if you'll find it's connected, but I think it's connected, and that way I want to go through it, and we still have some time, so I am excited. There are other, why do you always do this? Let's see. Michelle says, there are other trees that have been granted personhood and ownership of the land around them. I only know of one tree that has legal standing, and it's a and Key is fairly important tree in Key's neighborhood, but I don't know of a lot of trees. And I still only trees, like not other kinds of plants. I don't know of other plants. I know of, like I said, rivers, mountains. I know of a shoreline that's also been granted. Bodies of water seem to still be the easiest. Bodies of water. Yes. So, I don't know. Okay, so here's our next paper that I wanted to go to. This comes out in Frontiers in Education in October of 2022. So this is a little bit after these two articles come out. And this goes back to a concept that we have talked about many, many times before. But in this particular case, we are talking about plant blindness. And I find it interesting to think that in 2022, we're still talking about plant blindness, but it makes sense because, again, the mainstream public is way behind. So this comes out in, like I said, Frontiers in Education, an important perspective. So very different from the kind of general conversation that's happening in the world of academia, and also that's coming out through the plant scientist or even the artistic or the humanities. This is coming out in education, and it's talking on its biological basis. Now, you might remember, Michelle's telling us that there's a white oak and a forest in New Zealand. The forest in New Zealand I knew about. The forest in New Zealand is I covered the forest in New Zealand somewhere. I might have covered it here in a previous Plant Consciousness commentary, because the forest okay, hold on. I'm going to take this off for a second because we're talking back about this. The forest in New Zealand is fascinating because the forest in New Zealand was always considered a person to the indigenous tribes of that area. Then white settlers came in and screwed the whole thing up, and the forest is sort of dying. And now the indigenous people of the land, who still have a very strong connection to this forest as a being, have stepped back in and have taken over, and then they've gotten this recognition of legal personhood. But there's complications to that story, and I'm trying to remember what the complications are. It's a very fascinating story of them. The white oak, instead, I don't know much about, but that one I definitely know because it's I read this one, and it's yeah, like I said, it's fascinating to try this. All right, let me get into the white oak. Is the one in Georgia? Yes, that's the one I was telling you about. That it's in the middle of a square of some sort, and so the tree has like a historical significance relating to the township in which it's in. That's another interesting story. All right, plant blindness, a focus on its biological basis. So this is what I find really interesting, is that this is about biological. And like I was saying, we did a paper, a long time ago, called Attention Blink. It's all about our blink. Basically, it's about the response that we take as human beings to recognize plants, and how our visual response time for recognizing animals in photographs or in front of us is way faster than recognizing plants. And it was a biological study taken, and it's fascinating, super easy to follow. You'll find it again. It's called Attention Blinks. Yeah, Attention Blinks something, that is, and you can go back through our old sessions to find that. It's really, really fascinating. Okay. Plant blindness, or the inability to notice plants in one's everyday life, is a complex phenomenon in the field of science education. Although plant blindness is well documented in the literature, the underlying factors, whether biological or cultural, are still under research. Here I focus on its biological basis. That is, I review and discuss how plants' own inherent characteristics cause effects on human visual and cognitive processes. If you blame this on the plants, I am going to be pissed. Pissed. I just want you to know. I just want you to know that, because that's the case. Animals versus plant differences in human attention and memory are also addressed. Grounded on that knowledge, some recommendations for effective practices in plant science education emerge. Nandini, if you watch this, you're gonna love it. We're gonna remind you that you should watch this because this, I think, will be very useful for the work that you're doing. I conclude that only when we understand human-plant relationships will we know how to enhance teaching and learning about plants. Yes, which is why this is a big part of conversation inside of the naturally conscious community. As a matter of fact, Nandini, who I was talking about today, we just helped her as part of our mentorship session in the Naturally Conscious Leadership Group and also in a creative greenhouse this week because she is delivering a presentation to an educational group on working with the music of the plants and working with plants in childhood education. So completely agree with you that it's an important topic. Introduction. Human inability to, what? Oh, that doesn't work. Human inability to see or notice plants in one's everyday life is a phenomenon known as plant blindness. It also refers to failing to recognize the role of plants on Earth and believing that plants are somehow inferior to animals. See some other indicators for plant blindness in Table 1. Where is Table 1? Table 1. One may suffer from plant blindness when one does not see, show interest on, or pay attention to plants in his or her life. How many do you know that do that? One believes that the unique role of plants is to be the support for animals. We're not going to even touch that one. One does not understand what plants need to grow. Okay, wait, come on. That's not necessarily plant blindness. I mean, I love plants and I don't always know what they all need. There's one back here that's two actually. They are just making my life very difficult because I am trying my best. And I just can't seem to get it all right. One may suffer from plant blindness when one does not notice that plants are essential in their daily routine. This is a true one. One misunderstands the timescales regarding plants and animal activities. Exactly. They're not static. Oh, can you hear that? My neighbor is drilling again. One has never grown plants, make observations in their anatomy or processes, or identify plants. One does not understand the plant model, among others, basic functions as nutrition and reproduction and simple plant ecology. Unfortunately, way too many people. One does not notice the essential role of plants in the carbon cycle. One is not sensitive to the aesthetic qualities of plants and their structures. In other words, you're not beautiful if you don't have a flower. That drives me nuts. Nuts. How do you not see the beauty of grass? People are just weird. Recently, a proposal to rename plant blindness as plant awareness disparity, which I get the reasoning, but it's such a bad name. Has arisen with the objective of eliminating blindness due to its possible ableism. Fair. However, plant awareness disparity is not generally agreed term today, and therefore I will refer to this phenomenon as plant blindness. Understood. Tell me if you think plant awareness disparity. Basically, the reason is that there's nothing wrong with being blind. So therefore, using blindness implies that something is wrong with being blind. Fair. Totally fair. But plant awareness disparity, which means that, our awareness is, or can we call it like plant lack of awareness? I don't know. I think we just need a different term. But the disparity part, doesn't work. It's not catchy. It doesn't help in the science education realm. Plant blindness has attracted research for over 20 years, and it is currently accepted as a real thing. Literally a paper that just says it's accepted as a real thing. Okay. A real problem, at least in the Western society. Very true. Numerous investigations have provided evidences? Is there a plural for evidence? Does it need a plural? For the indicators defined by Wandersee and Schussler, which are the people who defined it, plant ignoring syndrome. I like it. Plant ignorance. Can we call that? Can we call it, instead of plant blindness, plant ignorance syndrome? I like this. This is a good term. I like this. Good job, Michelle. Good job. For instance, it is well known that students and the general public identify and or recall plant species more poorly than animal ones. True, because we grow up going to the zoo, but we don't go to botanical gardens. And when we do go to the zoo, there's these pretty big signs that say orangutan, blah, 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 boa constrictor, blah, 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 and there's all these beautiful demonstrations. But when you go to a botanical garden, you get a little placard this big that just says a name, and often in scientific terms, not the big sign that says, dandelion, tarasico, blah, like, wouldn't that be much more entertaining? And all kinds of different activities of herbalism and plant community. I think we need to design our own garden space. Like, we need to design a space that allows for true interactive plant communication and plant education. I'm putting that idea out there. 2, find animals more interesting and attractive than plants. And 3, have a poor knowledge about plants. That is a true statement. The potential to successfully overcoming plant ignorance syndrome relies to a great extent on finding factors open to change. A consensus exists that it is a complex phenomenon where biological, including human cognition, and cultural factors are major drivers. Yeah, major. Plus fear factor. My God, culture makes it seem as if like going into the woods is the scariest thing ever. Doesn't help. While other authors highlighted the cultural origin in their description of plant ignorance. Interesting. Talking about like pitcher plants in the chat. They're saying how there's this whole state park for pitcher plants with big billboards and stuff. We need that. But that's because they're pitcher plants. And, I want a big sign on grass, on all the different grasses, because I love grasses. Okay. Wait, where was I? Sorry. Yeah. The potential to successfully overcoming plant ignorance syndrome relies to a great extent on finding factors open to change. A consensus exists that it is a complex phenomenon where biological, including, I know I'm rereading it again. Where was I before? Sorry. Okay. They suggested that several plant characteristics, such as their uniform color and grouping together, lack of movement, and lack of a face, have an effect on how humans process visual information, which is the paper that we talked about with the attention blinks. Go look at that paper. It's so fascinating. And the whole commentary is really, really interesting. I learned a shit ton. It was so good. Note that what we see is not simply a translation of the image projected on the retina. Visual perception is involved in selecting, organizing, and interpreting the information. Although these authors grounded their explanations on a well-known visual principles, they lacked at the time of experimental support from the field of visual perception, which is why this actual paper is interesting, because they did have that. This came later with Ballas and Mommsen and Kansky, who demonstrated that plants indeed capture human attention less effectively than human. I wonder if one of those is the paper that I did, because 2013-14 sounds about right. It's also worth mentioning that the recent study by Schussler and Ulzak, which provided strong evidence for a cognitive basis, it is a bias anyway, either visual attention or memory were suggested as processes involved in plant ignorance. Yes. Here, I will review some of the biological factors that were suggested by Wondersee and Schussler as a cause for plant blindness. First, I focus on how an inherent morphological feature of plants, being green, has an impact in human vision. Next, I address how plants change their visual apparency and its potential implications for human visual processes. And in the third place, the difference between animals and plants in human attention and memory are also reviewed. Excuse me. I felt that coming on. All this will lead me to conclude that only when we understand human-plant relationships, hence why you should join the conscious community, the only online ecosystem specifically to nurture human-plant relationships. Sorry, I had to add that in. Will we know how to enhance teaching and learning about plants? Some recommendations for an effective education practice are also given. Okay, so how being green affects human vision. As noted by Wandersee and Schussler, plants usually grow in populations and blend together, which creates a chromatic and spatial continuity for the human eye. All shades of green. Hold on a second. I just realized that it's getting dark outside. And so I feel like I'm a little dark. What do you think? Is this better? No, not too bright. How about that? A little bit better. Okay. Yes, a little bit better. In other words, at some places and to a given distance, the consequence to the human vision is more or less homogeneous green scene. Cue green. What's wrong with green? There's nothing wrong with being green. Moreover, other morphological features in addition to color contribute to the homogeneity of the environment. For example, plants living in the same habitat usually have a number of similar morphological characteristics. In this regard, Givnish found that in particular habits, the form of leaves, small versus large size, entire versus toothed margins, and simple leaves versus compound leaves. No, not there. Depends on a specific factor such as moist nutrient quality, geographical area, or successional stage of habitat. As a result, different species of plants living in the same habitat may share some morphological characteristics, making plants less prominent to the human eye. What happens when we look at homogeneous visual environment? According to the eye movement research, when an individual explores a scene, two phases are distinguished. The initial viewing consists of a fast registration of its registration of the spatial layout. The subsequent phase is longer and more in-depth and element-centered analysis. The initial phase is characterized by short fixations and long saccadic movements. Where is I don't know where the footnotes are because they're gone. All right. Saccadic movements. Then the scanning strategy changes. Fixation time increases and more fixations are given in certain regions of the scene. This implies that saccadic movements are shorter. Back to the topic. One could think that a plant scene with predominantly monochromatic green color, it's not monochromatic, there's tons of shades of green in there. You just need to train your eyes for that. Would have a poor second phase, as there are not many elements for the eye to fixate. Note that fixations are known to be related to uptake of visual information. In addition, when the eye finds no fixations, as in our green scene, again, there's so many shades of green. What are you talking about? Lots of little plants and big plants and dark green plants and light green plants and thick green that's all together. Anyway, the amplitude of saccadic movements increases, resulting in uncomfortable perception. As uncomfortable? As a result, the individual may well change the focus to another scene. Therefore, less fixation carries a reduction in the collected visual data and a likely change of focus to other target element seen. In other words, when I see all this green, because I can't find anything to fixate on, I just go off and look for something else. With respect to the selection of a target in a scene, selection is governed. I feel very washed out. I know. Okay, that's better. With respect to the selection of a target in a scene, selection is governed not only by the saliency of the elements in the scene, this was already pointed out, but also by the task to be carried out by the observer and the emotional aspects transmitted by the scene. Then one could also think that an individual that suffers from plant blindness would have less elements to focus on, or plant ignorance would have less elements to focus on than an individual that appreciates plants, as no task or emotion is leading the former. It doesn't say, this is a very, very good statement. It doesn't say much of our attention spans or intelligence. Our attention spans are wee little. You have to train. That's why there's the scroll. That's why there's the reel or the short on YouTube, which has to be less than 1 minute. Seriously, that's why. Plants' ability to change their visual signal. Plants adapt their visual signal values to the environment by modifying their apparency. So we're always going to blame it on the plants. This can be done in two ways, becoming more or less visible. Really? Is that what's happening? This last one was proposed by Wandersee and Schussler as a factor for plant ignorance. I discussed this topic in more detail below. Decreasing their visual apparency, plants avoid recognition and thus predation. All right, I get what you're trying to say. But that's only some plants. A lot of plants want to be a little bit more showy. It is well known that plants can conceal themselves from animals such as birds and butterflies. For decreasing their apparency, two main strategies are distinguished: hiding in refuges and crypsis. Crypsis. What a word, crypsis. Regarding the first strategy, some plants grow in spatial refuge, that is, in an area where herbivores cannot reach, such as abrupt slopes and areas above and below the browse line for the herbivores. Other plants hide in temporal refuge, which consist of growing or flowering where herbivores are not active. Smart little guys, because Pando's not doing so good because without the wolves, there are more deer, herbivores, deer nibbling on all the little ones, all the little seedlings. And so therefore, Panda, one of the oldest beings on our planet, beautiful quaking aspens, dying off. We as humans, because we're afraid of wolves. So it just makes no sense. With regard to the second strategy, some plants can camouflage themselves, crypsis, among other similar colored plants, which is known as background matching. Not only, some plants mimic other plants. They literally change their physical form. We talked about this in a previous paper, and we will talk about it in a future paper as well, in order to match the form of another plant in order to hide amongst that plant. And some other plants resemble natural elements, e.g. stones, for avoiding recognition. Do plants become less apparent for humans when they reduce their visual signal to hide from herbivores? Most likely, because we pay even less attention than herbivores. A priori, the answer seems to be yes. However, as far as I know, a paper that has an I in it, interesting. No specific investigation has been made. No comparisons with cryptic animals either. On the other hand, becoming more visible is usually a reproductive strategy for plants to attract pollinators and seed dispersers. That makes more sense. Bird-pollinated flowers tend to be red and insect-pollinated ones blue, even though blue is a super difficult color for them to make. Similarly, mammals tend to disperse yellow or green fruits and birds white, black, blue, or red ones. Did you know that? Did you know that? I'm learning new things. Bird-pollinated flowers tend to be red. Insect-pollinated flowers now seem to be blue. Now I have a lot of different ways to think about things. Mammals tend to disperse yellow or green fruits and birds white, black, blue, or red ones. I'm looking over at tomato who has little yellow leaves and red fruit. Trying to see what that means. Moreover, trichromancy in primates is thought to help them detect fruits against a background of green leaves, young leaves against mature leaves, etc. Becoming more visible is also a way to emit warning signals to avoid a predator attack. Yellow, orange, red, brown, black, and white are often used by spiny and poisonous plants as defense. I am looking around at spiny plants. Do you use those colors? I now have to, there's so much for me to check. A number of studies have analyzed how prominent features, colorful flowers and fruits, enhance human interest, attraction, and willingness to protect plants. It's true. That was a really interesting study that was done on the fact that we tend to try to protect or conserve the pretty ones. Doesn't this go back to, wait, where was that comment? Let me go back and find it. Do trees have a pretty privilege? Yes, they do. But also flowering plants in general have a pretty privilege. Interesting, huh? A number of studies have analyzed how prominent features enhance human interest, attraction, and willingness to protect plants. If one applies the knowledge reviewed in the previous section, how being green affects human vision, Fixations in flowers and other salient morphological characteristics would be expected to be longer and more abundant. That is, more visual data captured and plant ignorance could be minimized. Visual attention and memory, animal versus plants. Visual attention and memory were essential parts of the explanation for plant blindness by Wondersee and Schussler. I next review how humans detect and memorize animals compared to plants according to the advances in the literature. First, one should consider how the conceptual knowledge is organized in our brain. I don't want to think about our brain, okay? That is, if animals and plants fall into the same compartment, Caramansa and Shelton suggested that our brain is organized within the distinct categories of animals, plants, and artifacts. Where do fungi fit in? Sorry, I'm curious. Where do fungi fit in? Are they artifacts? These were posteriorly condensed in the literature into animates and inanimates. Except for you have 3. How do they go into 2? Anyway, New et al. Found that changes to animates, including animals and among them humans, were visually detected by people more frequently and more quickly than changes to inanimates, including plants, vehicles, tools, and others. Really, you just put plants in the same category as vehicles, tools, and others. It was then concluded that humans give preferential visual attention to animates. Regarding memory, Narne et al. Found that animates are better remembered than inanimates, but the study did not include plants. It is interesting. But I get that this might be biologically caused, but I think it's culturally caused originally. I don't know. It's a good question as to what came first, our cultural biases, or does our lack of biological ability create the cultural bias? In fact, studies on animates versus inanimates do not specifically compare plants versus animals. Moreover, most of them use fruit and flowers as the only images of plants. Of course, because green is green is green is green to a person who doesn't understand anything. Interestingly, these authors rely their explanations on an evolutionary hypothesis. From a fitness perspective, animals have survival and reproductive value for humans. Because we are animals? Animals are potential predators and food, and other humans are potential mating partners and competitors for resources. Yeah, but aren't more plants food? And actually, here's where this theory, in my opinion, falls apart, okay? It falls apart because when you think about it, if I were to more easily detect the differences in plants, and I especially talk this about me because I grew up not knowing the differences of plants. Therefore, foraging is extremely scary for me because I don't always see the nuanced differences. I don't always understand which plants are edible or not edible. Instead, wouldn't you think that given that the preponderance of our food sources are actually plants, that biologically speaking, we would be more inclined to observing the minute differences in plants? Don't you think? Don't you think? I think. You tell me what you think. Hmm. Hmm. Therefore, rapid and successful identification of animates would have been a selective pressure for adaptation of visual and neural mechanisms in humans. I disagree with this. I think your conclusion is wrong. Sure, from the predator's perspective and the danger perspective, but from the food perspective, understanding the nuanced differences between plants would be way more advantageous for us because it gives us a preponderance of food sources rather than the few animals that we need to see in order to be able to hunt. I'm not going for that one. I'm not going for that one. Following that hypothesis, one could think that plants would have also been a selective pressure, exactly as they are potential food. Sometimes poisonous or stinging, shelter, tooling materials, etc. Exactly. However, questions remain open. Oh, so you believe the animal part, but you don't believe the plant part? Dude, come on. Come on. Following Narnia et al., it is fundamental to deconstruct the animacy dimension because still we do not know which the necessary and sufficient properties for animates to produce the effect in our brain are. According to the authors, cognitive biases may require agency, the ability to initiate causal action. So if it doesn't move, it's not a. It's because we don't see the threat. I don't know. It's interesting. Movement, mental states such as knowing or emotion, or even the ability to communicate in order for something to be considered animate. Interestingly, kitchen, yes, into account. Anyway, Kinchin found that animal feature that generated most interest in a sample of 162 students was movement. I think that's already a bias. Motion is exhibited in plants at all scales, from stomatal openings and closing on the leaf to branch movement in trees. How do you not see a tree as moving? How do you not see all the movement? I just find it weird. However, most movements of plants are unnoticeable to the human eye because they are too slow for us to perceive them. I don't know. I'm looking at some of the plants that live with me and I'm like, I notice all their little changes. Especially you. I have told you not to go onto the curtain rod. I have a plant. I have a diplodenia that is growing has a whole chain system to grow through the wall. Quite lovely. But I have told Key not to grow into the curtain rod. And Key is attempting to go into the curtain rod. Don't make me come up there. I will come up there. We made a deal. No curtain rod. No curtain rod. However, most movements in plants are unnoticeable to the human eye because they are too slow for us to perceive them, and therefore they are not expected to attract people's attention. People's as in human people's, I'm assuming. In any case, future advances in the field seem indispensable to understand the phenomenon of plant blindness. Recommendations for effective education and practice. Some science instruction time could be devoted to observing green homogeneous plant scenes. Giving a task, it's kind of like Where's Waldo, but it's more like Where's Key? I would play that game. Where is grass of this type? And then you show me a picture of that type of grass, of that species, not type, species of grass. And then I have to go off and find it. That could be a fun game. Ooh, we should think about that. Find this dandelion. Okay, find the dandelion in the homogeneous green scene. I like it. Giving a task, observing would give the eye elements to focus on, fixations. That could be made during a field trip to the forest, for example. The scientific practice of observation could be accompanied by taking data and making inferences and/or classifications and description practices. Note that all those scientific practices accord with inquiry-based learning. To finish, students could reflect about what they saw in the forest under the guidance of educators, reflective learning. Making students aware of their own plant ignorance would be the ultimate goal of the reflection. And also helping them find. I think that would enhance foraging learning. Actually, foragers are amazing. They don't see anything homogeneous. Prior training on plant ignorance, I like calling it plant ignorance. This is a good thing. Good idea, Michelle. Seems necessary in order for educators to be able to carry out interventions in relation to this phenomenon. This could be done during the university teacher training stage. Plant ignorance fits well into the area of science didactics as an obstacle to learning about plants. Pre-service teachers should be aware of this phenomenon, its symptoms, and its potential biological and cultural causes. Furthermore, when advances in the cognitive area allow us to understand how attention and memory biases lead to better identification and recalling of animals versus plants, we will be able to advance in the teaching of plants. This is excellent. But Nandini, I hope you watch this. We have to make sure that we tell her about it. So everybody who's watching, who knows Nandini, go tell her because I think this is going to be really helpful. And if you're an educator, this is some great ideas to how to enhance, not just thinking about how to teach, how to teach your students that plants, about plants specifically, but how to teach your students that plants even exist, how to break through the plant, quote unquote, blindness or plant ignorance, as we're calling it here. How these are some great ideas of just working on getting the visual eye to be able to see more, doing something that in biomimicry are called eyesights. I did a lot of eyesights, and I have a little notebook. Unfortunately, where's my notebook? Oh, wait, hold on. I can actually show you. Isn't this my eyesight, one of my eyesight notebooks? Yeah, look. This is a great example, actually. Okay. So this is an eyesight. An eyesight is where you basically look at an area and you're looking to understand the different biological beings, all the different beings that live in that area. Obviously, from a biomimicry perspective, you're usually talking about, from a biological perspective. Me, I included a little bit of everything. So you have an area that you're looking at. And this one activity, I actually remember because you see how it looks like a big conglomerate of green. I was sitting in a backyard in Florence. I was house sitting, and I was sitting in a backyard, and I was sitting against a tree, and in front of me was basically a big lawn. That was what was there. I am not a good artist, as you can tell from my scribbles and my chicken scratch. Wait, why am I making this so small? I am making this super hard for you to see. Excuse me. Let me make this bigger. Not that one. Well, whatever. Doesn't matter. We'll make this one. Okay, so here's my little chicken scratch that you can see. Now, I was sitting over here, and I was looking out, and you see that it might be for somebody else that this just looks like a big patch of green, right? But it was different types of green. And so there was kind of like this big lawn perspective that had this homogeneous part. But there were, and I wrote little notes like leaves from the tree. So there was leaves that had fallen from the tree that I was sitting under. And then I have shadow of tree behind me. So how the tree's shadow affected this. Then I have dandelions had their little seed balls. And then I had like all kinds of thin greens. I can't see, it's like super dark. Thin green stems, small yellow flowers from some other little plants. So this is a great activity. This was me outside by the chicken coop. And so I was doing the same thing. I was looking at like the legs of the chickens, and I was, trying to understand all the different tiny characteristics, the skin texture, and trying to capture it. So eyesights is a great activity to help with this, where there's all kinds of different aspects. Like here I was looking at Himalayan cedar, and I was just sitting there underneath a Himalayan cedar, and I was looking at the different leaves. I think there's a cicada here, and there's a few really cool a chestnut tree in front of me. And so I was trying to understand all the different texture in a chestnut tree. So eyesights is a great, great way to deal with this whole plant blindness or plant ignorance or whatever we decide that we want to call it. Check it out. You can do a search on biomimicry eyesights and get a lot of different ideas. But in reality, it's super. I jumped the gun. I tried to tell you too soon. It's really simple. And if you want me to give you instructions on how to do some really nice, super easy eyesights, just send me a message, or come in and come into the Naturally Conscious community and ask me, and I'll tell you, because there's an entire set of different kind of lens observations. So you can look at it at different levels, and you can even look at the same area across different levels to get different ideas to work with. So what are the patterns that you find? How do you identify these patterns? How do you work with these different patterns? It's super fun. And, I used to carry this around with me all the time. That's why I picked a very light notebook, because I used to carry around a little packet of colored pencils and this notebook in my backpack always, so that whenever I was sitting around waiting for something, or I just had time, or I wanted to rest, I could sit down and just stare out at the area that I was in, and I could see what was happening, and like do a little bit of an eyesight. And not all of them, like here's one relating to grass, right? So here's a blade of grass that I painted, and then there was also clover that was mixed in with the grass, and there was these different aspects of pink sorrels that were in the grass. And I just started to draw them. I am not a good drawer, like I said, but it was really fun to do. And you don't even need to leave colored pencils. Like here was just all I had was a pencil. So, and again, I don't know how to draw at all. And this was in Austria. I was in a lake area, dry, windy, sunny day. The seeds were the wind flyers. So there was all these different seeds that were flying. The bark of the tree, the different, I put in like, because obviously I didn't have colored pencils, I put the color in. So this must have been some kind of birch tree because I put white bark and then dark crevices. And then I expressed like the lake where it was and the isolation, like there was a little bit of a wall, if I remember correctly. And then there was these tall grasses that were growing around the various trees. And so it was a birch tree. I literally wrote it, birch tree. So it says you don't even need colored pencils. But when you do this, you'll notice all the shades of color, right? All this helps you with that whole green homogeneous thing. So it very much changes. Yeah, there's a cicada. This is my little cicada. I should start carrying this around again. I'm going to start carrying this around. This is, see, I called it my nature journal. Like, this is old now. I mean, but I am going to start carrying it around again because I think it's going to be fun. Okay, let's get to the conclusion of our paper. So, conclusion. In a sustainable future world where plant ignorance has no place, from this reflection, I conclude that human-plant relationships in plant ignorance are poorly known. And that because if you're just new and you're wondering why we're calling it plant ignorance instead of plant blindness, is because blindness implies that something is wrong. So they tried to call it plant awareness disparity, but we all agree that that's a horrible name. So we're going with plant ignorance. Plant ignorance syndrome, I think is the way that Michelle put it, and I love it. Are poorly known, and that research progress on how human brain processes plants is fundamental aspect to be up to date from science. I think she means from science, with science education. Only that knowledge will guide us on how to enhance teaching and learning about plants. Seriously, man, eyesights. Like, just do it. Where's Waldo games with plants? That's what we need. It is my hope that this perspective captures the attention of research aimed at deepening into the biological factors in plant blindness. Cool. I mean, I think that this is a great, very, very simple, very easy to read paper. It came out in 2002 in Frontiers in Education. It is by Ainara Achurra. Seriously, man. Basque country. They have the most interesting names. Plant Blindness, a focus on its biological basis. And of course, Paco Calvo is involved because he edited this. We always know when Paco's around. So what'd you think? I think that was really fascinating, right? So we went through 2 articles, if you remember. We went through our articles that were, the first one was connected to Can Plants Think? And this is understanding in 2022, what is the mainstream thinking around plants? Now, you remember that only about maybe a month ago, we did by we did an article that is pretty much the exact same article that came out in 2024 than this one that comes out in 2022. Seriously, we are not making a difference yet in the mainstream public. And that is why plant ignorance syndrome continues to exist. So we need to make a bigger impact. We need more children's education. We need more articles coming out talking about the latest research. Don't focus so much on the consciousness, although I think that that is interesting. I think that the intelligence part is way more interesting. I think that there's way more interesting as we've learned more about what plants are capable of doing and what they do. I think that when we put kin in that perspective, it's way more fascinating. And I think that we need to get the word out there in easier ways. This plant ignorance perspective, from the perspective that we have all these cultural biases, could be a way. I don't know. I just think it tells people that there's something wrong with them. And, human beings don't like to know that. But I do think that showing all the interesting perspectives of what we have found that plants can do and know how to do is a good way. And there are more books that are coming out. So that has been a great thing. Hence why we have the Plant Wisdom Book Club. Like I said, if you really want to read some fascinating books, the book we're reading right now called Ways of Being by James, James. Bertle is really interesting. And so come into the book club. Just find it on my website. I'll put it in the show links because that's it. All right. So that's it for me. I have, these 2 articles today and I had that paper. So I'm really excited. I'm very excited about a lot of this because it's interesting. Like I said, I have so many papers to show you, so many papers to share with you. I was looking at my list today before I came on this call because I always organize everything before we get onto the call. And wow, my list is so long because we are coming to the very tail end of 2022. We're in about October of 2022. And when we come into the beginning of 2023, there is an explosion of articles with much more emphasis in something that we weren't putting any emphasis in before: plant communication, because it's coming from the animal communication world that is pushing more what we non-biological people, non-academic people, more spiritual people talk about in relation to communication. There's a big push and a big acceptance that happens in the animal communication world. And this starts to push the idea of, well, let's look at plant communication a little differently. There's still not in the academic world, even today, enough. Like, first of all, animal communication and plant communication are not the same level. Plant communication is still way more biological and way more technical in the descriptions that hit into the mainstream and especially the academic world. But there's an opening because animal communication has started to move past the idea of just what's biologically being communicated to what we still don't understand, but we can prove that is actually happening. And that animal communicators are starting to make it into more conferences. And this is forcing that in a conference that's all about animal communication, there are at least 1 or 2 plant communicators in there that, again, are still trying to use a focus of biology, such as maybe the reason I understand what the plant is thinking is because there's a chemical signal that I'm taking in, which is fine with me. I am okay with that answer, but we're exploring it a little bit more. So there will be an explosion happening in 2023 of way more papers, way more conferences, way more different. So hopefully we might start doing a few videos. I have so many different aspects. I just need to organize myself and make more time for you because I really want to bring these to you. I feel like now we're into the fun ground and I need to reorganize all my stuff in order to bring you like the excitement of what this period has to offer. So I think that covers everything. Hopefully that you enjoyed it. I am so glad that you were here with me. Thank you for tuning in to this episode, this version. I'm so excited of plant consciousness commentary. I was looking for that banner, as you could tell. So thank you. Thank you. If you want to continue on these conversations, please join the Naturally Conscious community because that is exactly where we have these conversations. That's your premier online ecosystem for plant reawakening and accelerated evolution and co-creation with other kin, of course. Here you'll find expansive discussions. We have interactive courses. We have lots of live events every single week and supportive group programs like the Plant Wisdom Book Club and our Sprouts Writing and Creativity group. So there's just so much good stuff happening in the Naturally Conscious community. And that's really a place for you to connect with like-minded individuals that are collaborating with plants to integrate all of these different insights into their life. So that's it for me, Tigria Gardenia, with my plant collaborators that are all here. Again, no curtain. No curtain. Stay away from the curtain. Diplodenia, I'm looking at you. Until next time, please remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for me, Tigre Gardenia. I'm out.